Soon be launching. It will take passengers to and from Treasure Island. As KTV's Christian Cafton tells us, it is the first of many changes coming to the island.
San Francisco's newest neighborhood is a work in progress. Already, Treasure Island in the middle of the bay boasts a new ferry landing, and soon regular service will get underway.
January 1st, 17 round trips a day start here. We think it's going to be a game changer, both for making Treasure Island such a special place, but for continuing our great city's connection with the bay.
The new ferry service is just one part of the infrastructure already being built, like new roads and a new sewer system and geotechnical work aimed at protecting the island against global warming. $600 million so far, with a lot more work to go.
It is important to us that we provide housing of all different types, for all different income levels, that there is a rich network of public transportation and parks. It's those things together that are going to make this the greatest new neighborhood in San Francisco.
Final plans seen in these artist renderings call for more than 300 acres of open space. And in the years to come, the island will boast more than 8,000 new homes. The first market rate homes on Yerba Buena Island are set to open next year, as is this affordable housing with more than 100 units set aside for veterans.
And so this building is going to be affordable for homeless veterans, low-income veterans, and so it has the moral imperative of being a former military base serving homeless veterans.
20 more parcels are already under development for market rate and below market rate housing. The mayor saying reviving Treasure Island, adding new homes and new transit options like ferry service will play a critical role in easing San Francisco's housing crisis.
And it's just amazing to see what this place is going to become for people and how this place is going to really begin to come alive again.
Developers confirmed that the more than 2,000 people living on the island currently will be moved into the new housing as it is created. Eventually, developers say there'll be 18,000 people living on the island in just a matter of years. On Treasure Island in San Francisco, Christian Cafton, KTVU, Fox 2 News.
What we're going to do this evening is to talk about the lessons of Treasure Island, some of the experiences that people have been through, and the hearings that were held at the Board of Supervisors on Treasure Island, and the issue of whistleblowers that have been speaking out for decades, really, about the development of Treasure Island and the failure to have proper oversight. So we're going to have a number of speakers, and then we'll open it up to discussions and questions, and then comments about this issue. I first want to say that I appreciate many of the people who are going to be participating tonight, because they have really put their lives on the line in a way to get the story out about Treasure Island. And that's very important. They basically, put themselves in jeopardy by telling the truth about what's happening. And second of all, that the government authorities, both city, local, and state and federal, have known about what's going on in Treasure Island and failed to do oversight and ameliorate the damages and rectify the harm that has been done with Treasure Island as a radioactive dump site, and which people live on, workers and tenants, the community, particularly Black poor people who've been put out on Treasure Island. So this issue is not just an environmental issue, it's a class issue. It's a working class issue for poor people, oppressed people, Black and brown people. And it's important that the working people and the trade unions, all working people, be aware of that and take this up. And what we know is that there's a lot of money behind this, billions and billions of dollars, billionaires are behind this, like all developments on polluted land in this country. It's not a unique thing. So our first speaker is going to be Carol Harvey, and she's probably the foremost expert on Treasure Island and spent a good part of her life doing investigative reporting on Treasure Island, and put that out on the San Francisco Bayview, which has been a key media source in breaking the information blockade on Treasure Island. So we can thank San Francisco Bayview and Carol for actually getting the word out on what is going on in Treasure Island and how it's affecting the community. So Carol, you want to go first?
I could write 24/7 about Treasure Island. It's a never-ending story. I can't cover all the things that need to be covered. It's a constant frustration to me. But just a little background. I'm an investigative reporter who's covered San Francisco politics for 21 years and Treasure Island extensively since 2014. And I too have been a whistleblower at a large university and suffered retaliation from that. So I've been there and done that. I've got a graduate degree. I taught writing and journalism, and I know where all the commas go, and I know the difference between the truth and the facts. And I'm honored to be a truth teller, and I highly respect the process of investigative reporting. Good investigative reporting is fact-based, and I shoot lots of videos because it's hard to deny what's right in front of your face. I embed videos in every story I write. I shot 10,000 video clips walking across Treasure Island, and I post a lot of them on my YouTube channel, Carol Harvey SF, and it's available to everybody. In December 2013, I was approached by Treasure Island resident Catherine Lundgren. She told me Treasure Island was radioactive and that there were a lot of health problems out there. She invited me to the island and introduced me to people, and I began hearing harrowing stories from people who were very sick and attributed their illnesses to exposure to radiation and chemicals. I started videoing and interviewing people right away, and I'm reading this because I don't want to take up a bunch of, talk too long. So, and I wanted to be clear. And so in 2014, I met Chronicle reporters who covered the island after residents were told that the Navy hadn't been doing their job and there was a lot more radiation they hadn't been told about. It hit the news that Treasure Island was radioactive, but these mainstream media people were immediately pulled out, apparently to cover other assignments, and I decided to investigate Treasure Island because somebody had to do it. So in public comment at the February 8, 2021 Board of Supervisors hearing, former islanders who could identify themselves without fear of retaliation reported just enormous numbers of illnesses: racing heart, tooth loss, daily vomiting, excruciating migraines, inability to stand, sudden collapse, seizures, slurred speech, exhaustion, tremors, severe skin problems. There's this crusty rash that a lot of people have, really gross. Ulcers, breast tumors, reproductive organ removal, food allergies, mouth and throat sores, bone decay and broken bones, gallbladder and partial colon removal. Some very sick Treasure Island residents will be evicted with no place to go in the Bay Area's out of control rental market if they talk publicly about their illnesses or problems, and they couldn't talk at this hearing. So you know that they live near huge chemical sources, heavy metals like arsenic and lead. There's lots of lead all over the island, and radioactive material inside five so-called solid waste disposal areas that the Navy calls SWEDAs. And what the Navy did in 2014, well, starting in the 90s, first they found chemicals out there, and then they discovered radiation. They isolated 5 major areas that they decided they'd put fences around and call them radiation zones, with the idea that if people stayed out of there, they told people they stayed away and paid attention to the warning signs and the fences, they'd be safe, which is complete load of baloney. So, this is just a contrivance. They move these fences around all the time. And now there's one left, and it's the west side solid waste disposal area. They have opened up all the other 4. And we know they've done a crappy job of cleaning the island, and there's lots of radiation and chemicals left. So back in 2014, when I got there, I interviewed this man who I will not name, and his then 9-year-old teenage son. The man said that the huge blood volume coursing through his arteries and veins gave him constant pain, and this condition could morph into leukemia, and somehow it had. There were radiation sources up and down his street within 10 feet of his house. There was a toxic dump, and he was living 40 feet from one of those major cleanup zones. He developed leukemia, and 8 years later, he was still sick, and this winter he died. So his son fell in love with another Treasure Island friend, and he found his father dead in bed. So recently newsflash from investigator James Pepper, who's here in this meeting today, federal EPA rules mandate that no human being can live within 200 feet of a cleanup zone. This is a law the Navy breaks on Treasure Island with impunity because, as James pointed out, people in Treasure Island are living in the cleanup zone. So I'm writing a story now about a person who rolled their wheelchair next to the West Side solid waste disposal area that faces San Francisco. It's the last cleanup zone they're working on. And this was a former ammunition storage dump, through which workers have been scanning for more radiation and searching with metal detectors for explosive material and debris. And on March 24th, this person passed a barrier fence next to the West Side solid waste disposal area and were hit full in the face when an untethered tarp was lifted by winds, exposing an opening through which toxic dust blasted them in the eyes. The skin around their lips swelled and their face turned red. So some pretty serious stuff was riding on the dust through that opening in the fence that was supposed to protect the person, but didn't. They didn't know that all spring and summer, the Navy has been detonating unexploded ordnance inside that suita, Mark II, MK2 hand grenades, and Japanese mortars. It is possible they were hit in the eyes and face by shrapnel riding on the dust, and they are worried about permanent damage to their site. So Steve and I got together originally and decided we'd have this Zoom meeting because Guy, Taibi, and David Anton in this February 8 hearing didn't have enough time to talk about what they know about Treasure Island, and they know a lot. They are both whistleblowers. Guy worked on Treasure Island and then got himself, well, Guy, you can talk about that. He moved up to the California Department of Public Health, got himself in a position where he could actually do something about what was happening at Treasure Island. And I'd like to hear from both David and Guy today. And also, I want to point out that recently it came to the attention of a Treasure Island resident and I, who's doing a lot of investigation out there, that Taibi is the crucible. We know the city and county of San Francisco is terribly corrupt. Taibi is the crucible in which people are taught, we think, about the corruption, about the Willie Brown Pelosi machine, because Jared Blumenfeld, the head, who used to be the head of District 9 EPA, was appointed to the state EPA by Gavin Newsom. London Breed worked there. A girlfriend of Willie Brown worked there. Mark Cohen, who was a lawyer for Gavin Newsom, worked there. It seems to be a funnel through which these politicians go to learn how to be corrupt in San Francisco. So with that, that's the end of what I want to say. And I hope that the whistleblowers can really tell us what they weren't able to say in the hearing.
So
Given hundreds of hours to the Chronicle or to Reuters and turned over tens of thousands of documents. And it just to encapsulate, because I'm sure a lot of folks know my history, but I'm a degreed health physicist. I got here in 2001. I was a consultant to the Air Force, the BRAC closures at McClellan. That was the Western region for all the Air Force bases. So I was the technical advisor to the Air Force on rad cleanup. But after about 6 years, I couldn't be a part of that anymore. And I jumped over to another company that had the contracts for rad technical support at all these bases in a nutshell. And I became the radiation safety officer for that company. And then I had to step in at Treasure Island just as a kind of an emergency measure, because in a tour, I saw firsthand what was going on and then fought it from within as best I could. And, I'd worked all over the country and I'd never seen anything like it. And it was just, it was so egregious that, like I said, I could talk for days and tell you stories about how the system has just been manipulated, and the military, Navy, BRAC, they know this system, they play it well. And the fact that nothing's happened since, that's all part of the plan. They'll hear us out for a while, and then, the clock ticks, and they're still moving forward, but nothing else gets done. But this pattern at military bases, at closure bases, they do this everywhere. They're very good at this, and they know how the system works. Even the regulators that I worked on, I was a state regulator. I was a health physicist for the Department of Public Health, and I hear people talk about the city of San Francisco. They don't have any jurisdiction to release property or sign off on the cleanup. And if people listen to them, this is just another Navy tactic. When they don't hear what they want from the Department of Public Health, they ask the county health officer, who they don't have any technical background in this stuff. And they're like, well, the Department of Public Health. And, that's just a weaselly way to get around it, because they know under the rules of BRAC, the Department of Public Health is the agreement state de facto. They're the gatekeeper for everything rad in the state of California. They have to sign off on all the property transfers, the process, everything. And the Department of Public Health's been dumbed down. They've done their best to make sure, specifically after I went to work for the state, they changed the rules on who they could accept. They didn't accept anybody that really knew what they were doing. And they just believed I believe they thought they were just so culpable, there was no way out. And they know they're getting money from the military through the funds to provide, document oversight and things like that. But, they were in it so deep, and unfortunately, it's a very technical issue. So it's hard to just, give it the soundbite and explain to what's going on. But this is a really far-reaching mess. I mean, it's just so corrupt at every step. And the Navy knows how to play the game. And the people that are on the ground going step by step, the folks on this line, that, the BRAC will sidestep the BRAC rules. I found out most of my coworkers for the state didn't even know the BRAC rules existed. And which they were the same way at McClellan, they're the same way everywhere. These meetings and approvals and things, these processes have to happen. They would happen behind the scenes and get taken care of without input from the agencies or the folks that they were supposed to get input from. So they could just sidestep them and keep going. And, they would give lip service. And I've got more horrific stories than anybody could count. I've seen it from all angles, and they tried to put me in a box when I worked for the state. I had a good boss for a few years that let me kind of grind everything to a halt at TI and Hunters Point and some of these sites. So I was doing battle with them every month, but after a while they moved my boss out of his position so they could get at me directly and keep me out of the process. So, that went on till, 2016, 17 when, but there's nothing I haven't seen. Very orchestrated lies and manipulative stuff that, right down to the finest detail when they send reports, right as meetings are starting, so that the people that are supposed to review that stuff and comment in meetings don't even have time to look at the paperwork. They're still pulling it off their printer. And they do this. They know this system. They play it better than anyone else. And we're so far behind the 8 ball because the Fed EPA, I looked in tons of documents. When they would see that the local Department of Public Health have commented, they would tell DTSC, which is essentially the state EPA, hey, they're not a stakeholder. The local health department is not a stakeholder. CDPH, this document needs to go to CDPH. And we'd never seen these documents. And these are processes and properties that we're supposed to technically review and sign off on. But they didn't like what they heard from us. They'd send it to a local, and then the local would say, oh, okay, yeah, we agree, even though they have no jurisdiction over it. The Department of Public Health gets their juice from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They enforce all the health physics laws in the state. And they don't have the wherewithal, the folks, the technical expertise anymore. Not since I left, and a few people that I worked with at the same time that now left, they retired out. But they hire people, they'll pick 3, they'll have 3 high candidates, and the top 1 or 2 might be health physicists that are degreed or CHPs or doctors or whatever with plenty of experience. And they'll hire the 3rd one that has never heard of health physics before and put them in the positions and make them inspectors and do whatever. And they just do what they're told. So, because they don't know any better, but that's what you're dealing with. And they're just not going to push back. Why would they? They're at risk. They were culpable in all this stuff. They could have stuck their feet in the ground 20 years ago, and they didn't. So, and the Navy knows that as well. They brought them along. They sold them a bill of goods, and they bought off on it. So they're not going to say, all right, we've had enough. We're going to stop all this. If the local health agency is going to step in and take over some responsibility, who's going to tell the state that, you're not supposed to allow that? The state will be like, well, if you guys want to get involved in it, go ahead. It's just absurd. And I've worked in probably 1/3 of the states in the country at military, all these cleanup sites all over the country. And I've never seen anything like it. It was, when I got to Treasure Island, they had stored enough radioactive sources in a NAC box in the parking lot to give you a lethal dose in an hour if you were within 3 feet of it. And I shut everything down at that point and the fight started there. And that was in 2007. So, or 2008, beginning of 2008. So yeah, it's been a disaster from the get-go. And, there's strong forces opposing us. And we are the lowest folks on the totem pole, and they can wait us out. And we don't have the technical wherewithal of the folks to go to those key meetings and say there's certain things. There'll be meetings with judges and courts because they have to get signed off. These BRAC processes are very prescriptive. They have to do very specific things, but we're the regulators and folks like this online. Most folks are they're just not up to that process. And so they can't play the game. They don't know where they can legally push back. The system was set up so that for the RAB meetings were for community input. This isn't new to TISH TI. This is every base closure. You have to set up a RAB meeting. But, TI would stop, they would just decide not to have a RAB meeting. And these are just things that aren't done. But there's no repercussions when they do that. People can march down the streets and say something, but it's not going to matter. Because you got to get in front of a judge or fight that legal fight and say, they're not doing things in accordance with the BRAC process. And the Department of Public Health is like, they don't have the teeth. They've got a couple of employees that they hired that have no concept of what's going on. They rubber stamp everything. I personally know one of those people, one of those persons has not gone into the office for 2 years. And they allow him to sign off everything and he doesn't care. He's just gonna wait his time out. Doesn't matter how many times I've gotten in the face with him. He does what he's told and that's it. He just, for some reason he can sleep at night. I don't get it, but you know, I could give you very specific stories and very technical stuff. And I've done this with the Chronicle and Reuters and talking to Carol and everybody else, because I can go toe to toe with these people from a technical standpoint. But it's you know, the clock ticks. They give us they let us give a, you know, give us a little lip service, or they're going to hear us. And you know how many times we've had the mea culpas where they've all sat around the table. I've sat around with the table of the Department of Public Health and all these folks, and they'll say, okay, we're not going to do this anymore. Yeah, we get it. And nothing happens. So this meeting where we're kind of looking back saying what's happened, nothing happened. No, they're still moving forward. Nobody's stepping up to stop them. So
you can talk about the hearings that were held by Matt Haney. What's your assessment of that? What should have come out? What didn't come out?
It was interesting to see the restructuring and some of how they spun the wheel at the Department of Public Health, and people were in some different positions. But the Department of Public Health can at any time say, they can pull their licenses. This property is governed by the state of California. The Department of Public Health could walk in tomorrow and say, you guys are done. You put a lock on the gate and that's it. Because that was done by my supervisor's predecessor right before I got there. She stuck her feet in the sand and nothing happened at Hunters Point, nothing happened at Treasure Island for years. And they just have to say it and say, we will pull your rad license. You can't do any work. And that's it. And then until they get it all sorted out. But the Navy, the Navy doesn't play according to the rules. The stakeholders, the folks that they're supposed to listen to, how these documents, I'll give you 20 stories of how the HRA revision did not go through the, agreed upon or the laid out review and approval process. The state got it in a final format. This is the historic HRA that's supposed to go through a 30, 60, 90 day process through these agencies to review. And you have to resolve all these issues. If the state has an issue that's not resolved, you can't sign it off and go forward. They handed it to the state, approved, signed off. And the state is the one that has to even the comments from the 2014 HRA from the State Department of Public Health were made by Larry Morgan. He was my boss in 2009. Those comments were comments I wrote against the 2006 HRA. They just copied those comments and stuck them on the 2014 HRA because they knew technically the Department of Public Health had to review that document. So they just, okay, oh no, the state of California's signed, reviewed and commented on it and signed off on it. That wasn't the truth. That's just a shell game. Larry Morgan was gone years before that. They took his comments and put him in the comment section and they responded to his comments from the 2006 HRA, and then they just moved forward. And nobody called them on it and said, wait a minute, these are 2006 comments. They didn't review the document, and no one said this needs a technical review by the Department of Public Health, and all these comments need to be discussed and resolved as the agency in charge of all this stuff. But they didn't do that. They just, because they were complicit with my bosses. Some of my bosses flew down to San Diego at Southwest Div, where the head of BRAC is, and they, made some handshake deal, and we got a final document. And they retracted it because I made a pretty big stink out of it at the time. And then when they pulled back that 2014 HRA, and then it got put back in, and they said they looked at comments, but it doesn't matter. That original 2014 document that they submitted as a final document was completely improper, did not follow the rules. And no one does anything to say, hey, wait a second, this is not how this process is legally laid out. This is not consistent with the BRAC process that's used all over the country. And they do this all over the state on all these projects. It's however they can sidestep the process, they manage it. They manage us. I'm sorry,
David,
go ahead,
David, why don't you, I mean, you've been representing the whistleblowers at Treasure Island for years now, who've been fired, who tried to get their companies to enforce the health and safety standards, Tetra Tech. You've had press conferences. Why don't you talk about where that's at? Because these workers put their livelihood on the line to get the truth out to the people in Hunters Point and the people in the Bay Area and the country. What's happening with those cases, and where are we at in fighting to get get justice for these people, these workers?
All of the workers that were whistleblowers have blown the whistle, not for themselves, but for the public, for the people who were in Treasure Island and the broader environment around them. These suits that are been brought up are trying to deal with the fraud that's gone on. None of them are seeking jobs back and things like that. All of their times to do that had come and gone. So these guys are really, truly whistleblowers doing it for the public good, not for themselves. And what has happened with those suits? And first, what are the suits that we're talking about? On Treasure Island, whistleblowers inform the government that the cleanup at Treasure Island was being faked, was being done improperly and knowingly improper. And they did this so that the United States would recognize the problem, see that the cleanup was being falsified, and stop the companies from doing that and correct the false cleanups that had been happening for years that the whistleblowers were bringing forward. The Navy has fought and resisted at every turn to recognize those things. The Navy has made it very clear to the whistleblowers that they don't want that the whistleblowers bringing this information forward, that they want to just move along and they don't care about the fraud, they don't care about the improper cleanup, they just want to get it officially done, even if it's still dangerous to the public. A couple of things on the background to kind of get a picture on this. We now know that there's a tremendous amount of radioactive history at Treasure Island. But for years, in the 1990s, all the way into the early 2000s, the Navy was taking the position that there was no radioactive material at all on Treasure Island, at all. The department that Guy was talking about, the California Department of Health, was writing letters in the 2000s, 2003, I have a letter from them saying, have somebody out there looking to see if there's any radioactivity when you're doing all this work, because there could be. Well, as Guy talked about, it wasn't until 2007 that the company, their Shaw Environmental, actually had to have somebody out there to check to see if there was any radioactivity. One of the whistleblowers, Robert McLean, was in charge of that. And he went out there and in no time found incredibly hot radioactive material on the island, especially where people lived. And within no time at all, he and a small crew are finding lots of highly radioactive material around the houses, under the houses, and the like. Most of these are what they call discs, highly radioactive radium discs that if you put it in your pocket as a kid, you'd be sterile in no time at all and you'd be dead in a while. These are seriously dangerous pieces of equipment. And they were buried by the Navy over from this 1940s on. And they were put in these burn pits and bury pits that the Navy then, when they went to build the housing there, just spread the material around and built the housing on top of it. Robert McLean talks about how when he was doing these efforts to find this stuff, he's finding them all around houses with little kids and families that their children are having all sorts of blood diseases and leukemias and problems like that. They're finding it underneath the houses and they're told not to take it away because the Navy doesn't want people to know the stuff was under their houses. And for years before Robert McLean got out there, tons and tons of dirt was pulled out by Shaw off Treasure Island, represented that it was clean, might have had some lead or some other chemical in it, but no radioactivity material, because the Navy was saying there was no radioactive material there. Well, they're digging up this stuff and sending it to landfills and places that take dirt for uses. The Navy has made a big point of fighting to keep that information and quiet. The landfill up at Pittsburgh, where the wind blows over it, the dirt that goes from Treasure Island to that landfill gets put on top of the landfill and wind blows and radioactive material gets blown all over the public by Pittsburgh. When the Navy heard from the whistleblowers that not only was there this extensive material, but when Guy was there and for the years after, the company out there was trying to hide the work it was doing from RAD workers. RAD workers are there to make sure it gets done right. Instead, the company sends the RAD workers to one end of the island. Some work is done there, they oversee that. And on the other end of the island, they do a lot of digging and where there should be RAD workers overseeing it, but they don't want to do that because it slows it down and it takes time and money. That soil gets dug up and sent to landfills and places that fill dirt, and they have no idea that it could be radioactive, and it probably is. The whistleblowers have talked to me. In 2014, they were trying to find out what happened to this extremely radioactive item that was found on Treasure Island. That would have been reported to be in the millions of counts, which is high. If you're in 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 counts, you're all of a sudden starting to be in a dangerous area, 15,000, 16,000 counts. It gets in the books. This was in the million count. They tried to find what happened to it. Had it been smuggled off the island or what? And as part of that inquiry, they found that over 300 highly radioactive items had been smuggled off Treasure Island and the records erased. They were able to find that the company had tried to erase these records and had done it, but hadn't known that the records also were in a secondary source. We've informed the Navy about these things, and the Navy has refused to talk to any of the whistleblowers now for 6 years. Not once, not one time have any of the whistleblowers been contacted and said, please come and talk with us. We want to find out what the problem are on Treasure Island. We then brought the lawsuits on behalf of the government because the government wasn't doing their job. the government is now continuing to resist any exploration into what the real problems are with radioactive contamination that remains on Treasure Island and has been shipped off Treasure Island. I was very optimistic when Supervisor Haney and the others got a committee hearing. I believe it was in February. I thought the hearing was a positive step forward. The Board of Supervisor members in that hearing at the end expressed that they wanted to continue looking into this. They were very interested in exploring the problems, that they thought there were problems, and that they needed to address it. I offered to have the whistleblowers and workers that have not come forward but have talked with me meet with the Board of Supervisors in public or confidentially. Not one call has been come to us, despite my continuing to reach out to the supervisors saying, we're willing to do something, we're willing to help you. Not once. Not once has anyone from the Attorney General's office asked to interview any of the people at Treasure Island. The Navy, I believe that the Navy knows that there's serious problems out at Treasure Island and have been, in the process, been poorly cleaned up and not cleaned up. But that they're concerned that there's been decades of people living on Treasure Island on top of very toxic chemicals and radioactivity. And if they did the right thing, I think they fear that the damage they have done to dozens or hundreds of people might be exposed. People have died on Treasure Island from the exposures they've gotten. People have gotten extremely ill from those exposures. I think the Navy is afraid and concerned that if anything's really looked at regarding Treasure Island, that the facts would come out that the Navy has been killing and harming the citizens of Treasure Island rather than helping them, rather than being neutral, and that they want to keep that from coming out. I think there's a real problem here. I think the Navy is doing everything they can to keep any real inquiry from happening and from having anybody really do the right thing here. It's a real shame.
I'm Jeff Ruch. 28 years ago, I helped start an organization called Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, or PEER. And as our name implies, what we do is we work with people inside agencies such as EPA, DTSC, Fish and Wildlife Service, etc. We do an awful lot of whistleblower work. And for up until 2019, I was its executive director. We have a number of offices across the country. And as I stepped down my plan was to travel the world with my wife. We got a call based upon some disclosures we had made at Hunters Point and the level of falsification involving Tetra Tech soil sampling. And the call was from a now former Navy lawyer named Shannon Fagan. Shannon Fagan worked for Navy BRAC as a civilian lawyer after joining them in 2017 after more than 15 years in private practice. Among the issues that she discovered while working for Navy BRAC was that some of the soil sampling done as part of the rehabilitation of the 2014 HRA was done by the same Tetra Tech officials that had recently been convicted. And she read about these disclosures. So she went to her chain of command and expressed concern and suggested that they resample all of these areas, particularly in Site 12, which is near the residential areas. And she was told no. And the more she found out, the more and more she became concerned. In June, I think it was June, the scheduled meeting, June 19, 2018, of the Restoration Advisory Committee, Shannon felt she was legally obligated to share this information with the RAC. And on June 18th, at the end of the day before that meeting, she was fired. And as a probationary employee, she could be summarily fired right then and there, and she was escorted out of the office. And the next day she called peer. So public employees have whistleblower rights, but they're constrained and you have to go through certain processes. And in this case, we chose the environmental laws that she was administering themselves have whistleblower provisions that are enforced by the Department of Labor. So we filed a complaint which triggered an investigation. The investigation took place over the next 2 years, even though they're supposed to take place in 90 days. Anyway, at the end of that period, in June of this year, the Department of Labor found in Shannon's favor and said, we've concluded on the basis of this investigation that the Navy fired you improperly on account of your protected disclosures trying to administer these statutes. At that point, if the Navy acceded to it, then Shannon would have been awarded, I think the award level was about $750,000, including back pay, interest, attorney's fees, etc. The Navy decided to appeal. That triggers a full-blown administrative hearing. And as we get ready for that, the Navy indicates they want to mediate. And so they've triggered mediation prior to the evidentiary hearing. And we're about to go into that in early December. So that's our principal involvement with respect to Treasure Island. But I did have a question for David, and this has to do with the key tam suit, which was, it's my understanding the Department of Justice has taken over that suit. And the suit, in essence, charges Tetra Tech with defrauding the federal government. And if the Navy is complicit or colluded with Tetra Tech, that defeats the suit. And has that sort of come to pass?
One of the things with it's called the False Claims Act, is to step back a little bit and look at the big picture here. In the Bay Area, there are a number of military bases that the Navy controlled that were being shut down and turned over. One's Hunters Point, one's Treasure Island, and one's Alameda. And I represent the whistleblowers who brought forward all the issues for all three of the bases, including Hunters Point. Hunters Point is the one that's gotten the most publicity, in large part because some of the whistleblowers were able to be so descriptive and graphic about their fraud that it kind of forced the Navy to do something, because the publicity from TV stations and newspapers got to be so strong. So what happened with Hunters Point was the Navy hired some companies to do a review of Tetra Tech. That's one of the companies that has worked at all three of the bases. Review the data they generated from certain areas of Hunters Point, not the whole Hunters Point that they worked on. And that data review, your group, Perez, was really helpful in getting the draft reports out into the public. And I want to thank you guys for doing that. That was very helpful. When those reports came out, before they came out, they were set up in a way by the Navy to maximize the potential that even if the work had been done fraudulently, they would show up that was okay, because they were limited to looking at the data that Tetra Tech had falsified. And if Tetra Tech had been good at falsifying the data, it would come out looking okay. Well, Tetra Tech was even bad at falsifying the data, just like they were bad at cleaning up. And the review of the data by these outside companies, largely CH2M Hill, showed somewhere between 30 to 75% of the work looked falsified at the parcels on Hunters Point that they looked at, which was only about half of the geographic area on Hunters Point. As a result of that, The Navy then joined in on the False Claims Act suit only as to Tetra Tech's work at Hunters Point. So they have joined in that suit. The defendants have tried to get the whistleblowers out of that suit or out of being party to it, and that those efforts have been rejected by the court. We remain active parties in all parts of the Hunters Point suit. The Navy has not joined in at all on Treasure Island and Alameda Naval Base. The whistleblowers are pursuing that independent. We are alive and well in that suit, and the suit was kind of strange in that for years, while the government's deciding what to do, these suits were filed in 2013 and 2016. The government investigated or sat on them until they joined in on the suits in 2018. We were not allowed to do any discovery or case processing during that time. I did many interviews informally of whistleblowers and employees. When the suit was opened up, became public in federal court, the judge barred anyone from doing what's called discovery. That's where you get documents and question people. That was very frustrating, but this summer, in midsummer, the judge took that leash off us and now allows the parties to engage in discovery. And that's been happening. No depositions have been taken yet of whistleblowers or any of the people who were involved in the wrongdoing at any of the sites. Those will be happening early next year. We are very committed to pursuing Treasure Island. The fact that Hunters Point has gotten all the PR, that happened because whistleblowers came forward and NBC was willing to put them on TV, and that blew the roof off. Major entities like Reuters and the Chronicle have had tremendous pressure from developers and from the city not to print articles. I've been told that by reporters at these institutes. I've been told that by people who've been in the key editorial meetings. There's a real conscious effort to keep Treasure Island from getting any real public exposure. And it's very difficult and very troubling because the risk to people's lives and their health is very, very high at Treasure Island. I remember a meeting I had with about 40 residents of Treasure Island before these suits became public. I met with them and they told me about all sorts of health hazards they had. One of the things I did, and I asked the group, I said, because I know that one of the problems when you're exposed to radioactivity is sometimes your teeth fall apart, they become brittle. These people didn't know I was asking. I'm asking 30 or 40 people in a meeting. I said, hold up your hands if you're having real teeth problems, breaking, they're cracking, things like that. Almost everyone, their hands went up. Mm-hmm. How many people are having tumors, having unexplained, uncontrolled bleeding, all sorts of problems that when you look into research, radioactive exposure is one of those things that, you know, it has those problems. It was amazingly consistent. The Navy doesn't want to have people looking at the health and lives of those who have been living on top of an incredibly toxic island that they're trying to clean up and doing very poorly.
Let me repeat my concern because I don't think it quite got answered. When the Navy did the reanalysis at Hunters Point and found a level of falsification about 30%, EPA did a re-review, which found the level of falsification was actually 97%.
Right.
We obtained that information through a client who I can't discuss. That information sort of blew people's minds. That
Correct.
even caused Nancy Pelosi, then the minority leader, to request the Navy IG do a review about the quality of what the Navy was doing at Hunters Point. That was in 2018. So a couple months ago, we hadn't heard hide nor hair of this review. And so we FOIA'd the Navy IG to say, what happened to this request? And it turns out from the documents that we got, and I think I've shared them with Steve, is the Navy IG didn't proceed because the Justice Department asked them not to, out of concern that it would complicate the false claims action. And here's the concern. The nature of a false claims action is you're charging a contractor is defrauding the federal treasury, and you're suing on behalf of the federal treasury.
Correct.
And if the Navy is being defrauded by a contractor, the level of damages is quite substantial, but you can't defraud an agency that's in cahoots with a contractor. So if the Navy is complicit, colluding with Tetra Tech and all these other contractors, then it's unclear to me how these suits proceed. That's my question. How do you proceed?
You're absolutely right if there are, as you say, in cahoots. And the question is, there's a couple of different ways you can be in cahoots. I don't want to get people bogged down in the False Claims Act. This isn't what this is really about. But I think that the Navy did not know that, for example, on Treasure Island, when the Shaw Group, which is one of the two, Tetra Tech and Shaw did most of the work there. Shaw did a bit more than Tetra Tech there. When Shaw was having people secretly dig up soil without radiological oversight and ship it out, I have no information that the Navy knew about that was in cahoots with it. When the
but they weren't curious.
See, there's a difference between not being curious and being in cahoots.
Well, if you're incurious to the point where you fire your own lawyer because they're raising problems, you may have crossed that line.
And there's a real issue there. I think that the Navy is trying to this day to keep a real examination of their own failures from being done. I think the Navy realizes now, and has realized for a while, that they were incompetent, that they were totally mistaken, if not fools, about the status of what was really at Treasure Island. I don't know if in the 2000s, working up to the HRA, if they really didn't realize their own history of the tremendous amount of radiological history at Treasure Island.
I worked in that office at Treasure Island where that material existed that was used to generate the 2006 HRA. That material was sifted apart, and the Department of Toxics knew. That's why they did the evaluation and didn't call it a RAD site, because no place in the country it would immediately have become a Superfund site, and they would have put a fence around it, and everybody would have kicked everyone off. And the Navy didn't want that. The Navy knew full well what was out. In my opinion, the Navy knew full well what was out there. They came out and acted surprised when I told them what was going on. But because of the actions after, they took no steps. They could have very easily, the head of the Radiation Safety Affairs Office flew out a week after I got there and said, "You have a problem." She said, "You don't know what you're talking about. I'm getting on it," but I wasn't shutting up. I told her I was calling the NRC. She came out there and gave very specific orders to Shaw. And Shaw said, "Yeah, we're not doing that. That's not in our contract." And the Navy said nothing. I mean, they could have said, you're done here. You work for us. This is our site. And Shaw played this game where, well, is it BRAC or is it RASO? Who has jurisdiction? So it was a hot potato thing. They're like, well, if BRAC has it, then RASO can, feign ignorance. But they all knew. They knew the documents that were taken out because they have to get those documents with the assistance of the Navy. So what was left out of the 2006 HRA was still in that building that I was working in. They knew from the get-go. They knew beforehand. And from the standpoint of just common sense, probably worked at 50 military bases in the country at the capacity of a project manager or in some remediation or characterization. Everybody knew what isotopes were used at what sites. To think for 1 second that radioactive material did not exist in extreme quantities at Treasure Island was incomprehensible. It would have been the only base in the country where there weren't incredible amounts of radioactive waste. So to look at documents and write a historic assessment and say there's no rad there that in itself was enough to say the Navy knew exactly what was going on, because nobody with a straight face could have said, yeah, there's no rad material there. The majority of documents, there were licenses.
One of the issues that came up at the hearing, first of all, the fact that Amy Brownell, an environmental engineer for the city, is still working.
Steve, can I say, I'm sorry to interrupt you one last time.
Sure.
I was getting very frustrated with the Chronicle and Reuters, and I said, you need to attack a name because you're attacking institutions, put a name on it, and then I'll continue talking to you. And they put Amy Brownell on the cover of the Chronicle. And you know what happened after that? So this is just my 2 cents. Folks have different expertise with the law. How much success we're having at these other pathways. My point would be, pick a person that's up high, attack them, because we're just throwing sand against a wall at this point.
Well, I mean, the thing is, there's the billionaires who are behind this, run San Francisco, they run the country, they run the world. These agencies, we haven't talked about Michael Matri from the Test America, who exposed the fact that there were falsifications of tests of toxins at Hunters Point and Treasure Island. We haven't talked about Daryl Whitman, who's a federal attorney who investigated Michael Madry's discharge for being a whistleblower at Test America. In fact, the 3 federal OSHA investigators who were lawyers at the Region 9 office of OSHA, federal OSHA, were fired and bullied out. Michael Madry went to Nancy Pelosi's office with documentation about the falsification at Hunters Point. She ignored him. He tried to file a complaint with the U.S. Attorney's Office. They refused to take the complaint. Daryl Whitman went to Dianne Feinstein's office with the situation at Hunters Point shipyard and the falsification. That was ignored. So we're talking about, accountability, not just with a low official city and county of San Francisco, but the fact that Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein, Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom are all in cahoots with this development project.
And to jump in, you're not going to get any disagreement from me, because I'm in full agreement with that. My point is that if you've got these whistleblowers that have at really high levels, that you would think they could shake a stone, and it didn't go anywhere. You'd have to rethink your strategy. It worked with Amy Brownell, and she's low level enough, but it shook the trees. Pick the next lowest person, the lowest person on the totem pole, and work your way up. And you got to, dismantle the organization.
Well, I mean, at that hearing that was held, there's been no follow-up hearing. Matt Haney is running for, I think, the assembly. And, that's not even a question. Why are they continuing to build there? Later, it was on Channel 2 about the ferry service that the city is spending $70 million for a ferry service for the development of Treasure Island and the condos in Treasure Island. They're going ahead with the development. Also, the fact that the sea level is rising And it's going to be impossible to maintain that island with the sea level raising and flooding the island, creating a massive condition. So the development of the island, the cover up, the continuing cover up is something that is a political issue. It's not just a legal issue, it's a political issue, because the politicians who run San Francisco and at this point run the US Congress and the US government are themselves personally involved in collusion and corruption of covering this up. Otherwise, you can't explain it otherwise. For a $1 billion fraud on the federal government, which Jeff, your organization called out, largest eco fraud in the United States, and the fact that there's no congressional investigation of this $1 billion eco fraud of the federal government, that says it all. Why has there been no federal investigation hearings on this fraud? Because their hands are dirty. That's the only reason. Because they want the development to go forward, and to have a hearing, a congressional hearing on what happened at Hunters Point and Treasure Island means exposing their responsibility as well for taking forward this development project.
They've never missed a beat, Steve.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us are going to agree with you, but barking up the tree of how do we stand with litigation hasn't gotten us a lot of places. The only times it has is when we've actually put someone's head on a pike. It was Amy Brownell at one time. Obviously, she was an easy get, but
I think she's still
pick
working
someone
for the
in
city.
pick someone in that world, and I'll give you whatever you need to say. This person in toxics facilitated all this.
Yeah.
This person in the Department of Public Health facilitated all this and put their name on the front page of the paper for, and with Carol and whoever else will listen and say, we want to focus on some of the linchpins here and take this apart.
Well, I mean, as far as the papers and even NBC, they never really go to Nancy Pelosi. They never really go to Gavin Newsom and say,
do we think that we could get Nancy Pelosi?
well,
No one,
I mean, Nancy.
you'd have to take
Pelosi-
apart the organization below her, because you're not going to take Nancy
Well,
Pelosi.
what is the organization below her? The agencies, the OSHA, EPA, these agencies, in my view, have been captured agencies. That's why
Yes,
they
yes.
haven't been able to do the work that they do. So if you have
Right.
captured agencies and you have politicians, our political representatives who are involved in covering up the malfeasance, the criminality of the development of Hunters Point and Treasure Island in the midst of the health crisis and everything else, then you have a political problem. Now, if you have a political problem, as we do, then you have to take it up not just legally, but politically. And that means running against these people, raising the corruption and saying you have to be held accountable. I don't see, at this point, people have tried to raise it legally. They've tried to raise it in the newspapers. The Chronicle itself, in the Hearst Corporation, which owns it, is a developer. They want more development. That company, the Hearst, makes money off development, and they have development reporters who are in favor of development of Hunters Point and Treasure Island and other toxic dump sites. So and NBC, investigates, as a matter of fact, never went to Nancy Pelosi, never went to Dianne Feinstein and said, what are you doing about this? The fact that Gavin Newsom gave a $200 million contract to Tetra Tech for the campsite fire cleanup, what does that tell you? That tells me that the fix is
nothing we don't already know, Steve.
Carol,
I've been out this 20 years in this state. It's nothing we don't already know. I'm just proposing another tactic.
Well, I think Amy Brownell is still working for the city. Maybe we'll open it up for comments or questions.
I think she's pretty much been defanged, but I mean, other folks could tell me if she hasn't been. But I don't believe she's not in the mix anymore to be able to say, oh, that's safe and that's not safe anymore. She doesn't have that kind of juice. And she never had the authority in the first place, but she was bought and paid for by Lennar. So
well, not only that, she was involved in selling condos, which is a criminal.
Yeah, that's what I mean by Lennar.
Selling condos, you're a city official and you're selling condos for the Lennar Foundation. That's fraud.
That's what was put on the cover of the paper. And that's what ended up putting her in a box.
And so she's not being criminally prosecuted for that. That's a crime. Yeah, I mean, working for a developer selling condos on a radioactive dump site. I mean, I think that's obviously a criminal act and it could be prosecuted. Carol, and then why don't we open up? Well, somebody has their hand up here. Eric.
Yeah, just a couple of things. First, I want to just validate what Guy said about the Navy knowing that the extent of the radioactive contamination. I mean, that stuff was all about making nuclear bombs, and they have records, they know. And also just remember that in the late 2000s and early 2010s, reporters revealed that there were email communications between the Department of Toxic Substances Control and the Navy, specifically and openly talking about in those emails covering up the extent of the radioactive contamination on Treasure Island. They knew full well what was on Treasure Island. And then just to let folks know who I am, I'm a grassroots organizer of many decades, and I've been working as a grassroots organizer in San Francisco for a long time. Started working on the Treasure Island problem around 2011. And when I first caught wind that there were things going on out there. And and I live in District 6 and I work on the District 6 supervisor. And I'm the one that kept hammering on that supervisor, Matt Haney, until he had the hearing this past February. So now he's running, as has been noted, he's running for assembly. And we had been apparently Guy and David had been contacting them about getting things rolling. I had also been contacting them about getting things rolling and getting another hearing, and I was being ignored. And then when I saw that he was running for assembly, I sent them a rather terse email that said, if you expect me to go out and tell people to vote for you, I need you to get back in action on this. And he's got a new aide, so you all should know his aide on this now is Monica Barnett. So that's Monica spelled normally, and Monica.Barnett with 2 T's at the end and no E, Monica.Barnett, and I'll put it in the chat, at sfgov.org. She's the one that you want to contact about getting things to happen from Matt Haney's office. And please, Guy and David, if you're reaching out to Haney's office, make sure you ping me on that, because had I known that you guys were reaching out when I was reaching out, that would have increased the leverage of me complaining about it. And so we need to coordinate together on this so that they're not siloing us apart from each other and keeping us from organizing together.
Yeah, the person on the iPhone is me, Stanley Goff, civil rights attorney that's representing the residents of Treasure Island. That's who's on the iPhone.
Okay.
Stan, you want to make an update on your lawsuit for the Treasure Island tenants? What's happening with that? And then James Pepper will follow you. He's got his hand up.
Good.
Sure. So the update right now is that for people who haven't been checking, the defendants have filed another motion to dismiss. They have filed one before. I turned around and amended the complaint, where I kind of cleaned up the complaint, specified allegations against Amy Brownell, and I believe it's I forgot the guy's name, Mr. Chu from the California Department of Public Health. And then they turned around and filed another motion to dismiss. I filed my opposition. This was maybe 8 months ago now. And Judge Donato, who's the judge, he's still, the motion is still pending. He hasn't issued a ruling yet. So we're just kind of waiting for him to issue his ruling. But I'm not concerned. The allegations that I made, that I amended the complaint and brought in the amended complaint are very strong. So I'm not concerned about what the outcome is going to be on the motion to dismiss.
I'd like to ask Stanley a question. Stanley,
Sure.
Lennar was dropped from the suit. Can you tell me, Lennar? Can you tell us what's going to happen with Lennar?
So Lennar, for right now, I dismissed them without prejudice. So that means that I can easily bring them back in. I didn't want to make the allegations right now because, as far as I knew, or regarding the residents that I'm representing, they are not being harmed by Lennar. Lennar has, at that point, when I made the complaint, had not created or developed any property on the island. It's speculation that they are conspiring with the city, with Bob Beck, with Amy Brownell. But until I have conclusive proof of that, I don't want to just make allegations just to be making them. Once I get the discovery going with the lawsuit, with the defendants who are in the case, and if I see emails, if I see evidence of conspiracy or collusion and Lennar is involved in it, then I will quickly amend the complaint to name them as defendants. And so the way I dismiss them is that I can easily bring them back in. And that's why I did it like that.
Okay, James Pepper.
So my name is James Pepper, and I grew up on an EPA Superfund site for nuclear radiation. The DTSC says that this has never ever happened before. What happened at Treasure Island, the cleaning up while people were residing on the site. No, the EPA has been doing this for multiple different sites. In our town, they just came in and evacuated everyone and dug up the whole town, which I don't know if you want to do. There was a uranium process.
What town was that, James?
Glen Ridge, New Jersey, which is 11 miles due west of the Empire State Building. And in the next town in Bloomfield, New Jersey, this is the most densely populated county in the entire country at the time. It's more densely populated than New York at night. But they were processing, Westinghouse was processing uranium on a rooftop for the Manhattan Project, and US Radium was in the next town, and they dumped all their waste all over our town. And it was an enormous Superfund cleanup. So right now I'm 59. Most of my friends have cancer. My mother died of cancer from this, multiple birth defects off the scale, all in a tiny little area. So I looked at this from the point of view of what the Navy did in the past. And so I've been documenting I have two websites. Carol has them, so she can send the links out. One is Treasure Island, California, and the other one's disaster area. And I've gone through all the Navy reports and wrote down what they did and where. I have the orders that they made. When I have two orders that they issued in 1946 to dump plutonium directly into the San Francisco Bay. I have all the training information for Treasure Island, the training bulletins, which was the magazine for Treasure Island. Actually, the training for the entire US Navy had all these articles on all the training that took place there. Treasure Island was the Navy's Atomic, Biological, and Chemical Training Center on the West Coast. ABC. They have manuals, the training manual, ABC Warfare Defense, 1960, 1963. 1963 is online, it's the same one. Was photographed on Treasure Island. You got a picture of a tank being decontaminated, it's a field gun. And they have this big giant compressor there, and I think they're decontaminating VX on the site. It could have been mustard gas. And the Marin Headlands is in the background, so is Alcatraz in this picture. And so I have that. I've been gone through all the Navy. I've documented as much as I can. I'm still doing that, but it's ridiculous. And so I've also gone through all the TR reports from the technical reports from Hunters Point. I can tell you what they did. They purposely spread contamination over Pittsburgh, Dublin, and San Bruno to figure out ways to clean up after a nuclear attack. They did, I just can go on, but there's also a couple other things. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission actually shut down all the radiation trading at Treasure Island because they didn't do leak tests. They've had violations in the 80s, and they were actually shut down by the NRC because they were leaking radiation all over the place. There's like 15 different license violations, and I'll put that on my Treasure Island page I'll play tonight and the next day. I'll give you all the links to all the information. My articles have links to the source documentation. I've got it all down. Now, there's also, let's see, The transcript of the hearing was edited by the city. Everything like Eric's testimony was completely ripped out. Carol had transcribed the hearing from what she had heard, what everyone said. The official transcript that's on the city website, they just erased it. They changed things. And so I have that on my Treasure Island page, an article on how they changed it. And I indicated where the changes were made. And most of the testimony was basically the exact opposite of what was said by the witnesses. No mention of Lennar is in there. They removed all of that. They changed the names of it. They changed the names of, for instance, radioactive, they would go radioactive, separate words. So if you try to search through the records of the city of San Francisco, you type in radioactive, you won't get it. It won't come back as a return of information. And let's see, oh yeah, the chemical training at the first, the arsenic bubble under the 1300 buildings, the housing that they talked about in the hearing. Hold on, I gotta drink something, I'm losing. Excuse me. There's an arsenic bubble off the side of the first USS Pandemonium, which was right under all that housing. Lewisite is a chemical weapon. It's usually mixed with mustard gas. And we know mustard gas was used on Treasure Island because the Navy did a study about it. And that's all also on my Treasure Island's webpage. Lewisite is arsenic and acetylene. Guess what they found in that field? Arsenic and some sort of an oily substance. That's lewisite. It's a chemical weapon. It's used to kill people in mass quantities. VX, mustard gas, sarin. These are the gases that were tested at all the training bases, including Treasure Island. It's in the manuals. It's in the instructions. I just posted the mustard gas and the bromide testing that they did with the radioactive isotopes. And it's all on my pages, and I keep finding new information all the time. And what was else? Oh, the Chronicle. The Chronicle is compromised because the Hearst plant, the printing plant, is a toxic waste site. It's on Islay Creek. I don't know how to pronounce it. The city wants to develop that creek. That's an all massive toxic site.
Islas Creek.
Okay, don't develop it because there's toxic waste sites all over it. And for some strange reason, the DTSC and the water boards think that toxic sites end at property lines. They don't. They go out much further. And there's one toxic site, I think that the city needs to understand that they're exposed too. Now, everybody here has been exposed to the nuclear radiation. Me from my hometown and you all there for all the bases. But the Navy had this site at 50 Fell Street. It was the Navy dispensary. And they were in charge of all the doctors and all the medical for Operation Crossroads. And they brought back samples to that site. So they're going to be alpha contamination all over the place. And the EPA, if they did their job, would be on this, they'd have to do a monitoring of all the buildings within, I think it's a mile radius of that site. That includes Twitter headquarters, that includes City Hall. They'd have to be checked out. The same goes for Fort Mason. Fort Mason did radiological training. They were also involved. They were, in fact, in command of all the ocean dumping of nuclear waste. That right there. Then you have the Fort Baker was the Army's biological lab. The Navy had a biological lab in Oakland. So this whole thing is much larger than you guys realize. And there's all this radiation. There are actually it was the Navy and the Army came up with the idea of a portable nuclear reactor to put into operation in case of an atomic attack. They could fire this thing up at bases all over the world. And so they built those things in the Bay Area. There was a nuclear reactor company called Aerojet in San Ramon. When they built their factory, there were only 400 people living in that town. That was a city. Mountain View had one. There's one in near Pleasanton that's trying to be decommissioned right now. So this is a much larger problem, and it's all over the place. So that's about all I have to
James,
say.
if you
My name's Toni Perez, and I actually grew up on Treasure Island. I lived there for 9 years.
Toni.
Yes.
Great.
And thank you. And I've been very sick. I had a double lung transplant not too long ago from idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, which is a lung disease that is environmentally caused. So hearing all this really hits home to me. I mean, I've known for a long time that there's been toxics on the island, just because I have another friend who's an attorney friend who looked into a lot of it. But wow, this is really overwhelming for me. I'm still fighting.
It's difficult. I mean, it's difficult
It's very difficult
for thousands of people who've been lied to, have not been told that there's radioactive contamination and other kind of contamination. I mean, it's criminal, and there should be criminal prosecutions of the people who've covered it up. So I think, it's not a mistake. It's not an accident. It's criminal malfeasance. It's basically murdering people. That's what they've been doing. They've been murdering people. And, I think now, I mean, we have an opportunity with David Campos and Matt Haney, who are both running for the assembly in San Francisco. One of the things that could be done is a public letter to both of them to call for a halt in these developments because of the toxic and dangerous nature of these developments. But one of the issues, again, that we face in San Francisco and other communities is that the building trades, unions are supporting them. It's jobs, even if their own members get sick, and workers who work on these projects get sick. They get contaminated, but they don't seem to care about that. In fact, the San Francisco Labor Council took a $500,000 grant from Lennar for supposedly education. And you have a developer giving money to the Labor Council. They're not interested in challenging these developers. But I do think politically, if people on this call and people are concerned about stopping these developments and holding these people accountable, making it an issue in this election, are they going to demand accountability by the Department of, the departments of public health in California, in the state of California, which have, from what Guy said, they've not done their job. They've covered up what's going on. So I think that that's an opportunity if people here on this call are interested in doing that. That's one possibility.
Absolutely.
Steve, I did want to speak to that if it's okay.
Sure.
So I'm going to drop all of their emails in the chat, both David Campos, Matt Haney, and Matt Haney's aide. So I dropped those in again, so make sure and copy those. Yeah, I'm also a part of a new coalition that's all of San Francisco Bay, working on all the toxic waste sites around the Bay. And now that it's been too long since I've heard back from Monica Barnett in Matt Haney's office, I'm getting ready to copy all of those people in that coalition and all of you all that were in the previous coalition that pushed on Matt Haney's office. Copy all of our emails together so you can all respond back to Haney. What's going on? Why aren't we getting another hearing? And that way he knows when he's running for assembly that we're going to hold him accountable. And if we do it all together like that, then that'll have a big impact. So I'm going to send that out pretty soon. And then I want to agree with Guy on another point, which is you got to pick a target who you can move. So if we keep, hammering on and suing the federal government and the Navy, et cetera, and the EPA, that's fine. We should keep doing that. But it's totally right that picking Amy Brunel because she was so corrupt and spearheading by aiming at her made a huge difference. And that's why we need to spearhead these local politicians. David Campos is also running for assembly, and he's in the district attorney's office. We've all reached, both Guy and David and myself have reached out to him and asked his white collar crimes division, he's the assistant to the DA, asked him to get the white collar crimes division to get on the case and start doing something about this. My guess is that what appears to me to be the case is that the white collar crimes division is corrupt and they're not going to move on this. So people need to take that email for David Campos and just directly email him and say, what's up? We thought the DA was going to do something about Treasure Island, and now nothing's happening. And the more people pressure these two politicians who are running against each other for the assembly, the more we're likely to get action out of them. So,
another suggestion.
Yes.
I worked for the Department of Public Health. They are the last arbiter. They get the last piece of paper to sign for these property transfers before anybody can build on them. They're supposed to be the technical spear through this entire process, checking on off of all of it. They're not politically protected. They're a bunch of people that kind of fell into their state jobs, got pulled in under usually reduced standards, and have been elevated to positions and now are pressured to sign off and review documents that they're way over their head. They have no idea technically what's happening. Everyone's running circles around them. If you want to go after an agency, the Department of Public Health could shut down Treasure Island and Hunters Point tomorrow.
And
those
California
facilities.
Department of Public Health.
I'm sorry?
You mean California Department of Public Health?
Correct. The California State Department of Public Health. They write the licenses, the radioactive material licenses that allow these people to work. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission gives them the authority in the state to license and regulate those groups that do the work. The Department of Public Health could show up tomorrow and pull those licenses and all work would stop. I don't have a problem. I'm just saying.
Oh, okay. Well, the
you
thing
want
is,
to
if we
go
can
at
get,
the,
yeah,
if
if
you
we
want to
could
go
get,
at the weakest link in this, the ones with the most juice that have just gone along for the ride, because the Navy, BRAC pays them tons of money because technically they have to pay them to review these documents. So at some point what happened was the Department of Public Health believed they worked for the Navy and they worked for toxics, but they don't. They work for the citizens of the state of California, but they get their funding, they believe, I mean, it goes to the general fund, but they get tons of money to review these documents and work this process with BRAC. That's the law. And they feel like they don't want to risk their funding, but at the end of the day, they're not doing their job. And they have all the authority, all the jurisdiction to do whatever it takes. And if you push toxics and say, what do you think about this rad thing? Toxic, well, talk to the Department of Public Health. That's not us. We're chemical. And if you talk to the Navy, they'll say, oh, you need to talk to the Department of Public Health. They actually have jurisdiction.
Second guy, I think we get the idea. How about the idea of drafting a letter that would be an open letter, one of those types that goes into the Chronicle, where we submit it to the Chronicle and see if we can get it published. And it's the thing about the Department of Public Health, do your job.
The Navy and toxic, they're perfectly willing to let CDPH be the fall guys on all of this.
Right, but I mean, if
let them.
Public Health got some backbone, they could cause things to go differently than they've been going.
Yeah,
Well,
or we're
but they're
afraid
run-
enough
But
because
they're
they saw
run
their
by the
name
guy.
on the.
Look, Gavin Newsom runs these agencies, and Gavin Newsom is part of the development plans at Hunters Point and Treasure Island. So I'm not against, putting the heat on the Department of Public Health, but let's be clear, it's at the top. The rod is at the top. It's not just these
I'm
agencies.
sorry, Steve, they get their authority from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission
That's
in
true.
Washington. So when you start pointing to an agency and their job is radioactive materials, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission comes in and audits them several times a year, and they're not doing their job, and they're they're in the newspaper saying you're not doing your job. That's pressure from a lot
Okay,
of areas.
I'm in favor of audits, but the Nuclear Regulatory Agency itself is a wired agency. So I don't have faith, to be quite honest, and I've worked or studied this for a long time, that any of these agencies are going to do their job. The whole idea of development of a radioactive nuclear dump site in itself is ludicrous.
Of course.
I mean, that whole conception,
yeah,
that you can clean up a radioactive nuclear dump site at Hunters Point and Treasure Island, that's ludicrous.
Well, covering it in California, it's not legal to make a radioactive disposal site. It would have to be licensed, and the state will not license a radioactive disposal pit. But for some reason, they change the remedies and allow people to pave over areas that are impacted. They're not requiring a license or calling it a disposal pit. They're not meeting any, they're not adhering to any law. The only agency that's allowing this is the California Department of Public Health.
My name is Sandra. I'm actually a former tenant of Treasure Island. I've been gone for the last 2 years. And I think you said that you don't see anyone taking responsibility. Can you explain that a little bit more to me? Can you explain that a little bit more to me? Because as a former tenant, and I was on Treasure Island for 15 years and raised my children, and I have a medical condition, and all my friends are still on Treasure Island. And I heard you say that you really don't see anyone really taking responsibility. It kind of like just gave me a slap in the face. So can you kind of explain that a little bit more?
Well, okay, the development of Treasure Island and Hunters Point was basically a criminal enterprise. In other words, the people that wanted to push the development knew that it was a radioactive dump site. They knew it was contaminated. So they basically rigged the development so that there would be no accountability. People are getting sick. I mean, when we had that last hearing in February, tenants reported, and they reported that tenants are getting sick.
I'm aware of that.
Yeah, they asked at the hearing who's responsible. Well, the Department of Public Health in San Francisco is responsible for the health of people in San Francisco. If people are getting sick in tenants and in city property, they have the responsibility to do investigation. They have responsibility to do testing of people. We don't have Dr.
Okay, so let me kind of interject on that, because because as a tenant, I think I'm a little bit more affected than you would be. So I've been part of all these meetings. I've been one of the ones that's been standing in the meetings complaining about the water, where the discs were found. I've been part of that. In the 1300 building, I've been part of all of that. I think so we're talking about all the whistleblowers and this and that and this and that, and then we have Mr. What's his name, Carol? Mr. Silver, the attorney for the
Stanley Goff.
Stanley, yeah. Okay,
Stanley
so
Goff,
we hear all of that, but we're also hearing about the whistleblowers, and then I hear Mr. G, which I love to hear you talk. I always love to hear you talk. I hear what they're saying. My concern is, why can't we hold somebody responsible? Like, we've been going through this for years. Trying to have somebody step up and be held accountable.
Okay, well, there's an election in San Francisco for assembly. You want to hold these politicians responsible. You get them to say, what are they going to do? And are they going to do anything about the cover up and the fact that people are dying and getting sick at Hunters Point and Treasure Island? That's the time to say it.
That's the Gavin Newsom and David Campbell, but as we all know, this goes way farther than them, because I do remember when Willie Brown started the project to put the tenants on Treasure Island.
Yes.
So the project was actually started by Willie Brown. So it really goes deeper. Gavin Newsom and David Campbell, they might be able to do something. but not as much as what somebody else may do. I'm kind of looking out for my kids in the long term. I'm looking out for my sister who is still on Treasure Island, and numerous of other friends are still getting sick on Treasure Island. And all we can talk about is the redevelopment. As we know, on January the 1st, is that's when that boat is going to start coming in. Then they got that building going up where they're going to put 120 veterans and kick the rest of the people off that they done made sick. So these are issues that are, the Treasure Island resident that I would like to see. Carol, you know how I am. Like, let's grab the bull by the horn. Let's do something. I got a daughter that's about to be 20, was raised on Treasure Island. I hear this young lady get on there saying she lived there for 9 years and she just had a triple bypass. That's concerning for me. So I'm kind of like, I think, of course, Mr. Mann, Matt Haney, and David Compost, yes, they run for election, and let's throw it out there. Like, I have no problem yelling at Matt about anything, but it goes deeper than Matt, and I think we need to go deeper. We need to call out bigger names.
I agree absolutely with Sianda on that. I think we have not isolated that entity in this meeting. I think we're skirting it. I think we need to get some way to get past the Navy. I think these lawsuits, Stan Goff, David Anton, this is a way to do it. But we're the big guns are the Navy, and they refuse to come to that hearing. The Navy is responsible for this. TIDA is responsible for this. They are the target, and we're skirting all of that. We're not talking how to go after them.
Well, that can be in the statement around, look, this is a system problem. It's capitalism. That's what we're talking about. People make profit off of the development, and they don't care if people die. So,
but isn't TIDA making money off of putting tenants on the island to preserve the island so that they can do the redevelopment?
That's right.
Yes.
So shouldn't we be going after? Isn't TIDA is like at fault as well? Because then here you take these people that have compromised immune system,
that's right,
all of this and that, and you move them onto a toxic place, and they're getting sicker to make your pockets bigger. Like he's gonna prosecute somebody.
Yeah.
Steve, on that note about TIDA, that I did want to add just some quick bullet points about what we're asking Matt Haney to do, because he's the one that's most likely to move on this. So one of the first ones is if you look back at that February 8th hearing, you'll see Aaron Peskin specifically say in that hearing, let's remove TIDA from being the agency that oversees Treasure Island. And if we can that's part of what we're asking them to do. We're asking Haney to pass legislation to protect the tenants and to enable them to move off. And part of that would be removing TIDA as the entity that manages the island. But that's so that's one of the bullet points. The other one is just, we need a cleanup corruption investigation like the one that was for Bayview Hunters Point. And that's pretty obvious how that needs to go. And then we've already mentioned this a little, but the other bullet point is that, and Matt Haney in that hearing specifically made a big point of this, that he was shocked that there have been no direct health studies of people that live and work on the island and have lived and worked on the island, like yourself, Shanda. There have been no health studies directly of people. And so he specifically mentioned that he wanted to do that. And so that's the other thing we're asking Matt Haney to do.
I'd like to say this, Mr. Brooks, like I do agree a health study and some of the tenants coming forward, but as we all know, you're not going to get any tenant on Treasure Island to come forward about their health. We are talking about, and I am going to say myself, when we moved there, we had no other option. We needed housing. So how are we going to come forward and say, oh yeah, this happened, and be guaranteed that we have a place to live?
Well, the thing is the city has been covering up the health problems. And that was what was very clear at that hearing. They know that there are health problems at Treasure Island, and they've been covering them up. They don't want a testing of the health of the tenants and the workers at Treasure Island.
And if the San Francisco Department of Public Health tries to do a health study to get an honest response, you're going to have to protect islanders from retaliation.
And that's the problem right there, Carol, if we know that my fellow tenants on Treasure Island, I just took a chance and I moved on my own. Because I have a compromised immune system, but I still have a lot of friends and family on that island. And when they get kicked off the island, where are they going to go?
Nowhere.
Right.
So,
The fact of the matter is the city could order a testing of all people, workers, tenants, everybody. They don't want to do that.
That may be true, but you have managers like Matt Garcia. As soon as you get word and somebody from his organization that they rent from or whoever is holding that part, Max Garcia is going to kick you off.
Well, no, this is not an individual saying that this is not an individual saying that they want to test. This is the city saying that they have the responsibility to test people about their health things. So it's not up to the individual to come forward. Basically, people have been contaminated. The reason they don't want to test people, all the tenants and the people who've lived there in the past, is because they would be liable.
Yes.
They'd be liable. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about liability. The government and these capitalist politicians who've been pushing this development don't want to be liable because we're talking millions of dollars. My position is that we should say, stop giving money for cleanup and give the money to the tenants for proper housing off these radioactive dump sites, give the money for proper health protection for these people. That's where the money should be going. Instead, Nancy Pelosi in the reconciliation bill that was passed put in another $40 million for remediation of these sites.
Yeah,
that's where they're putting the money.
And the tenants are scared.
Testimony at the hearing in February that John Stewart and these managers, they privatized the development of the housing and the maintenance of the housing. They've been terrorizing the tenants. That came out at that hearing in February.
And it's not, and I'm going to, I am a tenant. I've been gone to, and I'm going, that is so true.
Okay. And what did Matt Haney do about it?
Well, he wasn't there when she left, I don't think.
No, he got the testimony.
Matt was there. Actually, Matt actually.
Yeah, Matt was there. He got the testimony.
So I know Matt very well.
Matt Haney was there when the people testified they're being terrorized by John Stewart and these developers who've been put in there in the privatized maintenance of these facilities. Well, what he could do is call for an investigation and prosecution of these of John Stewart for what he's doing.
And Steve, all this should go into that draft letter, and this is why we're asking Haney to protect the tenants from retaliation.
Right. And I believe if we write Haney and we actually ask Haney for help, I mean, I'm not going to lie to you guys, I'm a Matt Haney fan. So I believe, and I've seen good work, and I believe if we did ask Matt Haney for this help, that he will step up. But I do agree with Mr. Brooks once again, it needs to be a conjoined letter, not just one person, one at a time, because if they say things happen when it's done in numbers.
Yes, thank you. I was just going to say that because people have been emailing him alone, he doesn't respond to us. We need to all be joined together.
It should be a group letter. There's no question about it. And we should use this letter to expose all of these things. That's step number one.
Okay, well, I think we've got our work cut out for us.
I have one more thing.
Okay, James.
The NRC does have regulations on, they have to test the workers and I believe the local residents. I'll look into this, see what the law is. That would automatically require a survey of all the people.
And they should be testing the animals too.